Could we get a call to order? Roll call.
Yes. Chair Thompson,
Present.
Vice Chair Lee is absent.
She'll be joining us later.
Thank you. Board Member Bolte,
Present.
Board Member Hirsch,
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item we have is oral communications. The public may speak on any item not on the agenda. And do we have any members of the public who'd like to speak?
We do not have any raised hands for oral communications.
All right, thank you. The next item is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Jody?
Yes, we do have changes today. We are asking to change item 2 and 3, just to flip those items so that we would be hearing 300 Pasteur first, and then we would do the study session on the height transition. The other just item of note, the action item number 4 is really just a continuance. There are some additional things that needed to be fixed up before the hearing on that item. So it will be heard on May 6th and not today. Those are the changes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next item is city official reports.
Yes, if it comes up. Okay, great. So as per usual, we're still in virtual meetings for the time being, and we'll continue that way. The next page should show the future items. So on May 6th, again, we will be talking about 4256 El Camino, which is a hotel project that we did, but this would be more of some basement changes that they're asking for. We also have the 233 University. Sorry, that's just an ad hoc review. And for the main board, we would be talking about the handbook that the council recently published. So we'd be going over that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is the study session preliminary review. And like Jody mentioned, we'll be talking about 300 Pasteur first. So this is a preliminary review request by Stanford University Medical Center to allow a 38,000 square foot addition to the 1989 portion of the existing Stanford Hospital. I'll hand it over to staff.
Okay, good morning. Let me pull up my presentation. Sorry. So today, this is the preliminary review for the Stanford University Medical Center nursing pod extension. The building that we're looking at is centrally located within the Stanford Medical Center campus. The red rectangle represents the existing nursing pod building, as well as the promenade that is between the Stanford Hospital, the new portion of the Stanford Hospital, and the older portion of the Stanford Hospital, as well as the Children's Hospital to the north of the site. As a general overview of the Stanford University Medical Center project, in 2011, the overall renewal and expansion project was approved. This included the Stanford Hospital that was built over the last couple of years, which has been more or less completed, the expansion of the Children's Hospital, new School of Medicine buildings, one of which has been built, updates to the Hoover Pavilion site, which is located north of the main site, as well as new parking facilities and road improvements. A current application that is also being reviewed is an application for a road extension that was part of the original project entitlement. The project that we are looking at today is not part of this original entitlement, which is why it is an architectural review board level project. In terms of the overall site, there's 3.6 million square feet of building allowed, and this project would require the site to temporarily be over this. However, this is allowed under the CUP. It would start a 3-year conditional period to reconcile the floor area between the newly built area and parts that are proposed to be demolished as a part of the original entitlement project. There are 3 main guidance documents for this project: the conditional use permit, the development agreement, and the design guidelines, as well as the EIR. And I'm going to take a minute to go over some of the items from the design guidelines documents. So the first one is to explain the context that the nursing pod project, the nursing pod building, is within what's called the Pasture Mall district of the Stanford Medical Center. And so some of the key points from this are to concentrate the height towards the center of the site to reduce the impact on adjacent properties, looking at the intermingling of the buildings and courtyard landscape, and to provide courtyards to allow natural light and landscape between the buildings. This view also shows the promenade. On the left, you have the existing nursing pod buildings, or excuse me, on the right, you have the existing nursing pod buildings, and on the left, you have the Stanford Hospital with the promenade in between. And this is the main pedestrian pathway through the campus, going from the School of Medicine buildings in the south to the Children's Hospital, which is not shown in this picture, to the north. Staggering is also an important massing technique in the guidelines, to have the buildings offset and have the in-between areas used for landscaping and open space. Another technique is to have equipment penthouses set back from the edge of the building to reduce visibility. Something that's unique about the nursing pod buildings is it does have what the design guidelines call a daylight basement. This picture in the upper middle shows the nursing pod building and the daylight basement as it currently exists. One item that the design guidelines call out is that this can create a moat-like space around the building. So something to consider is whether the proposed project improves this condition. This guideline also talks a little bit more about the importance of courtyard and in-between landscape areas. The design guidelines also include a palette of materials and colors. One important aspect of this is dividing the materials of a building into primary, secondary, and accent categories. However, there are many buildings throughout the medical campus, and while they need to work together, they are not necessarily all the same materials and colors. So looking at the nursing pod expansion project, the proposal is to add 38,000 square feet to the existing 134,000 square foot building. This new addition would have a 71 bed capacity, which includes some new beds under the total 600 bed limit for the hospital, as well as relocating some beds from older portions of the hospital. The proposed height is 4 stories, which matches the existing nursing pod building, and one of these is the below grade daylight basement level. there's below grade courtyards, and that would be modified as a part of this project, as well as landscaping modifications to the promenade. And the exterior of the building would be matching facade changes that were approved in a staff level architectural review for the main nursing pod building last year. However, work on this project has not started yet. So the top image shows what the existing nursing pod building elevation looks like, and the below shows the additions that will protrude to the front towards the promenade, as well as the facade change that was previously approved. This shows side elevations, as well as the promenade between the nursing pod building and the main Stanford Hospital building, which is this side. This image shows the 3 courtyards. Currently, there is no access from the promenade to the courtyards. This design would add gates and paths for maintenance in the 2 courtyards on this side. The 3rd courtyard to the right is more unique. It would have recreational facilities for the psychiatric ward of the hospital, and there are certain requirements that go along with that. And overall, the particular plantings would be looked at more so in the formal application phase. The key input that we're looking for from the ARB today is on the overall size, form, massing, and scale, the integration along the promenade and throughout the site, the materials, the design of the gathering spaces, including the promenade and the courtyard, and the overall access, as well as the height and character of the proposed fencing and elements along the promenade. This concludes my presentation, and the applicant has a presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, board members. My name is Molly Swenson, and I am a senior program manager in Stanford Medicine's Planning, Design, and Construction Department. On behalf of our entire team, I'd like to thank you for your time this morning to discuss our proposed addition to Stanford Hospital's nursing pods. I'd like to start by providing a brief overview of the overarching Stanford Medicine renewal project scope, of which our project represents one small but key component, and also share some of the public space considerations that have guided our decision-making as this project has progressed. Our design team will then share some of the specifics of the design intent as it relates to both the architecture and the landscape. To first reorient you to the renewal project, as Emily mentioned, nearly 10 years ago, Stanford Healthcare, Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, and Stanford University entered into a 30-year development agreement with the city of Palo Alto, which allows for roughly 1.3 million net new square feet within the boundaries identified here, our main medical campus and the Hoover Medical Campus. The renewal project scope includes new and replacement hospital and clinic facilities for the Adult and Children's Hospital, some of which are now complete, as well as replacement research and laboratory facilities for the Stanford University School of Medicine, the first phase of which has recently completed. For Stanford Healthcare, one of the key goals of the renewal project was to achieve timely compliance with state seismic safety requirements, including replacement of the original 1959 hospital in its entirety, and moving inpatient beds from the 1959 buildings into seismically compliant facilities. Another key goal was to provide modern, state-of-the-art facilities designed to deliver high-quality healthcare services. And to this end, the project scope included the renovation of the existing 1973 and 1989 portions of the hospital. These interior renovations, which began late last year, include transitioning shared patient rooms to single patient rooms, which will temporarily reduce bed capacity in this portion of the hospital. Before we move on from the broader overview, I wanted to point out one of the key elements of our site context. Our proposed addition would abut what is known as the Promenade, the primary north-south pedestrian axis for the medical campus, which connects the hospital facilities to the School of Medicine facilities. The Promenade is a key thoroughfare for staff and medical residents, but is really a space that is quite interior to the medical center rather than a typical public street. Now zooming in and looking at the Promenade and our proposed project in more detail, the two extensions to the nursing pods shown here would add a total of 58 net new inpatient beds, which would enable the relocation of the remaining beds from the 1959 facilities, all within a minimal building footprint. As this proposal was developed, we relied on the medical center design guidelines approved by the ARB in 2011 to guide our decision-making. And with the project's proximity to the Promenade, we felt that this presented an opportunity to really think about the types of public spaces we were creating along this key thoroughfare, and to even allow it to become a destination in itself. Thinking about the levels of activity along the Promenade, it was our goal to build upon existing nodes of activity and really reinforce the nodes at either end of the Promenade, and allow the middle segment to become more of an opportunity for relaxation and respite. With that in mind, our project would create a new outdoor seating area at the southern end of the Promenade, proximate to retail, food and beverage service at the adult hospital, as well as the adult hospital entry plaza. And the middle segment would offer amenities geared toward more quiet activity. And then thinking about some of the specific programming opportunities, for the terrace area at the southern end of the Promenade, some of the possibilities we're considering include health screenings, farmers markets, temporary interactive art installations, healthy cooking demonstrations, just to name a few. And then for the middle segment of the Promenade, we're planning for interpretive panels that would speak to the history of Stanford medicine and offer an educational opportunity as one walks along. We're also planning for bench seating amongst plantings and beneath trellises, giving an opportunity for quiet contemplation. And finally, at the northern end of the Promenade, in the space known as Wang Plaza, as part of a separate scope, we're planning for ping pong tables and eventually a mobile library cart. With this background context, I'd now like to hand it over to Pam Kurtz with Perkins Eastman, who can speak to the building design.
Thanks, Molly. I'm Pam Kurtz, principal at Perkins Eastman, and lead on this design effort. First, a look at the existing conditions on the Promenade. The two images at left show the existing landscape as it meets the Promenade in the upper image. And at the base of the building in the lower image, where you can see that this consists of a steep ivy-covered slope. The images at right show the existing view of the Promenade looking north, where you have a clear view of the long beige stucco facade of the existing 1989 building, and then looking south from Wang Plaza. And then turning to our proposed plan, for orientation purposes, north is roughly to the right. At the top, we have the new adult hospital, the Promenade, the bridge connection to the pre-existing hospital, the 1989 nursing pods known as D, E, and F pods, the proposed extensions DX and EX, 2 view gardens, and a courtyard for psychiatric inpatients. Looking at the west elevation, you see that the massing follows the staggering technique identified in the medical center design guidelines. We took special care to make sure that there wasn't an alignment with the extensions and the new adult hospital. And the scale is in keeping with the existing hospital buildings. Here you can see the relationship to the new adult hospital with similar window module and articulation, but scaled down to the pods. The north and south facades are both glazed, providing a connection for patients and families to the garden spaces. The view and gardens terrace down one level from the promenade. In terms of material selection, we have again taken direction from the medical center design guidelines, including a neutral beige color palette for the high performance concrete panels and replacement stucco at the existing pods. Shadow boxes at the patient windows use horizontal fritted glass, drawing on the language of the window baffles at the new adult hospital, but appropriately scaled down. Our design effort has given great focus on the promenade at the pedestrian level, where the pods and extensions really serve as a backdrop. Simple canted tactile panels provide subtle visual interest with shifting shadow lines throughout the day. Trellises provide human scale. With that, we'll move on to views as experienced at the pedestrian level. A view from the southern end of the promenade. With the new terrace area on the right with loose seating, you can see the rhythm of the trees and trellis elements and large garden spaces between the new extensions. The trellises pick up the accent color used in the soffits at the new adult hospital, reinforce the pedestrian focus, and reduce perceived building mass. And here is a view from Wayne Plaza at the northern end of the promenade. You can see the continuity of fencing and planting along the length of the promenade. I'd now like to turn it over to Adit Paul, who will provide more detail about the landscape design.
Thank you, Pam. I'm Adit Paul, Associate Landscape Architect at Associate Principal at BFS Landscape Architects. As Pam has already noted, the landscape consists of essentially 4 parts: 3 courtyards and a redesigned promenade edge. The courtyards themselves are essentially west-facing spaces with the old hospital and the new extensions wrapping around the south, east, and north sides. This first slide shows the south and the center courtyards. For now, these are referred to as D&E, that are terraced landscapes for viewing only and without visitor or patient access, as Emily had implied earlier, except for E, which is the top right courtyard, which is also an emergency exiting courtyard with a ramp. In scale, these 2 lower level courtyards are similar in size at about 7,500 square feet in area. And the frontages, to give you an idea, are 140 linear feet for D on the left and 110 linear feet for E on the right. They will contain a variety of small to medium-sized trees that flower in different seasons, along with a lot of planting, which we will get to. The sections below, these show that the landscape has been envisaged as a continuous green buffer with seasonal flowering. These gardens address viewing as well as patient privacy, extending all the way from the building to the promenade with only a fence separating the two.
I'd like to let the applicant know that your 10 minutes is up, so please wrap it up if possible. Yep. Thanks.
The F courtyard is a carefully programmed outdoor space with psychiatric patients, approximately 4,500 square feet in area, with activity areas and garden plantings. This is actually a regulatory requirement for the psych facility that is being relocated from the main hospital. For patient privacy, that fence between the upper public space on the bottom right and the courtyard on the lower left is basically has a sandwich construction of warm wood on the inside and slatted metal on the outside. Next slide. The plantings at the D&E courtyards consist of a 2-layered approach. The layer closer to the windows will have heavily flowering garden plants that can be seen all around Palo Alto to bring comfort to patients. And this is balanced by a textured yet seasonally flowering landscape back further in the middle of the courtyard. This large variety of flowering really supports the habitat creation goals of the city urban forestry master plan. Next slide. The steel fence that separates the courtyards from the promenade is slatted in a modern yet random pattern for relief and balances the need for privacy with transparency. It's dark brown in color and it varies in height from about 4 feet in the middle of the courtyards to about 6 or 7 feet closer to patient room windows for privacy. It's a long element, about 450 feet, but broken into 3 different portions. So we would really like your suggestions on this element. Next slide. This is the last slide, and it shows the interpretive signage, which Molly referred to. It will narrate the story of the Stanford Hospital through text graphics and historical photographs. And the vertical panels will be lit up at night as part of a lighting scheme for the entire promenade. And once again, we welcome your suggestions on this element as well. And with that, we end our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did forget to ask the folks on the applicants team that presented, for our transcriber, we'll need you to state and spell your name for the record. So could I ask the first person who spoke, which I believe was Molly, to state and spell her name for the record?
Sure. Molly Swenson, Molly, Molly, Swenson.
Thank you. And the second person that spoke was Pam?
Yeah, Pam Kurz, P-A-M and K-U-R-Z.
Thank you. And the last person that spoke was Adit?
That's Adit Pal, A-D-I-T and P-A-L.
Thank you so much. Does the board have any questions of the applicant?
I have a question, Osma, if it's okay.
Yes, please go ahead, Board Member Balte.
To the applicant, could you pull up again slide number 19, please, on your presentation? It was the landscape, that one there. What is the distance, please, from the edge of the pedestrian walkway to the face of the building?
That at the building itself, it's about 5 feet, and in between buildings back to the fence, it's about 8 feet, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my question.
Are there any more questions of the applicant?
I have a sort of a general question. Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
me?
Board Member Hirsch.
I note in the drawings that A and B, I guess it is, are completed, all would be completed, but C is not. Can you tell us what is it? Is it part of a future schedule? Some of the plans, floor plans have been left kind of empty. Did you hear that question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're referring maybe to the F pod.
Okay, F, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
the F
yeah.
pod. A portion of that is coming at kind of a later phase. It's part of the Children's Hospital
Okay,
and will likely be rolled into the project at a later date.
okay, fine.
Yeah.
So it's not included in the bed count at present and
Correct. It's part of the Children's Hospital.
oh, it really is. Okay, fine. I
Yes,
understand.
yeah, it's maternity floors.
Thank you. Any questions, Board Member Liu?
Yeah, I have a question. So when I was at the site earlier this week, I noticed that the existing pod building has 2 different colors and different types of stucco joints that appear to be different colors, and I was wondering what are those, and if those are being retained, because it seems like in our plan sets, all of the drawings of the existing building are just showing one color.
Yes, there are 2 colors currently in the existing pods. One is kind of an ochre toned color, and the rest is a beige color. We're proposing a more neutral color base for the future finish. It'll still have horizontal banding that you see articulated which is pretty typical of a 1980s vintage building. But we stepped away from the two-toned color on the background.
Okay, and also to follow up on that is, it seems like the stucco joints aren't normal control joints. Are those something special? Is that a special detail?
Yeah, they are a special detail. They're more of a metal trim piece that we are retaining, though improving the waterproofing details around them.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify on that question, so the two-tone will become one tone in the proposed, is that right?
Correct. Correct.
Thank you. I have a question on that last slide where we see the facade that's facing the promenade. Can you describe physically what's happening in each of those depressions? Is it like a triangular depression?
Yeah, it's a canted panel. And so it probably will feel a little crisper than what our rendering is showing on the left side. But we've canted them about, I don't know, 15 degrees or so side by side. So that's what you're seeing there. It's pretty subtle, but you do notice a change during the day, which I think is a plus. It's also something that the adult hospital looks down onto. In addition to the promenade, the higher beds at the new adult hospital.
Okay, thank you. And then do we have any members of the public that would like to comment?
Chair Thompson, we do not have any raised hands for this item.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Who'd like to go first? Board member Lou?
Sure. So thank you for your presentation. I do find this particular project really interesting, mostly because I've never been crazy about the existing hospital pod building. It's a pretty blank box, and it sort of hides all the interesting and lively activity that happens inside the hospital. I think my first impression was that the building was too close to the promenade, but in thinking about it more carefully, I actually think that the promenade is really pretty long and relatively generic, and I think the effort to make individual courtyards is a good strategy. The end walls that are kind of blank with the canted panels, I think still could probably use more work. I think I appreciate the effort for the interpretive panels and the canted panels. I think that helps. But I think maybe there may be ways to make it even more pedestrian friendly. On the materials, I think that those are all acceptable. I think we've only had one other project in Palo Alto propose the tactile panels before, and it hasn't been built yet. I think it's still under construction. But I think that from what I've seen, it really has more depth than any other option on the market. So I think that those are acceptable. I did look at the plant list, and I think that looks good. I do like the designs of the individual courtyards. I am not crazy about the fence on the north end, but I think I understand why it's there. I kind of like the idea of the slotted metal panels there, because in a way it kind of ties to the Edward Earl Stone panels, with the screens. So I think that's okay. The 450-foot length seems to me to be problematic, but I will look at that more carefully next time. I didn't realize it was that long. And then I think my last comment is that the trellises along the promenade, they might be too small and too repetitive. I didn't really think about it when I was at the site earlier this week, but I think I will look at that more carefully for the next meeting. It seems like they're pretty small, and I'd like to look at the design of those more carefully. So that's all that I have on this particular one. I think generally it looks good. I think you guys are on the right track, and I'm curious to see what the other board members think. So thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Liu. Board Member Balte?
Thank you, Ozma. I generally share Alex's comments pretty closely, actually. Almost everything he brought up is on my list. So I'm going to focus on the one thing I think is negative, because otherwise it's really a very good proposal, which is that I think the buildings are too close to the pedestrian promenade. Maybe the applicant could pull up slide 19 for us. That would be helpful if it's possible. Chair Thompson, can we? Yes, there we go. This confirms to me what my fear was walking around there the other day, that the edge of the building is a 3-story blank masonry wall for the most part, and it's very close to the pedestrian promenade. And when I thought twice and 3 times around it, the way Alex is also struggling with this, I just don't see that situation much of any place else on the medical campus. Almost always the tall buildings are set back a little bit more with more landscaping in front of them, trees, things like that, which really works very well to integrate very large buildings into what's a very pedestrian friendly place. And this is the one spot, the end of the 2 nursing pod extensions, where I don't think it's working. It is possible that some change in the treatment to make it a little bit more interesting, maybe more interesting at the pedestrian level, would help. Perhaps some way to maybe even narrow the pedestrian pathway slightly to get some trees in there or something would help. But I think the real answer would be just to push the building back one room bay. I know the applicant doesn't want to do that, but that's what it would take, I think, to really keep this in sync with the rest of the wonderful work that's being done on the medical campus. So I'm going to limit my comment to this one item, because I think this is really important, and I think this slide shows it pretty well. I just don't think this is working. It's too close to the pedestrian pathway right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Balte. Board Member Hirsch.
Well, we're all focused on kind of the same thing here. I went to the back to the Lucille Packard facade and took a look at that, since the architects are the same here. And it's such a wonderful softening of a building and treatment of the vertical element as a graphic. And my thought was somehow to do something with the end of the building that would work much better than what you have at present. I thought the possibility even of that stairway opening onto it in some way could begin to change the facade. Each one of those pods has a stairway on it, which frankly I don't quite understand. Does that connect you back to the promenade itself? Is it going to be used that way? But my biggest concern is also the ends of the pods. I think that the fact that it's kind of an element that continues the format of the inner pod, and is broken with landscape, allows it to be more of a solid element, and it's only a portion of that promenade that you actually see, that you actually are adjacent to it and that affected by it, where it but there's a significant difference between in the space leading up to the new hospital building adjacent, that relieves it to some extent, but yet it's a hard surface and ought to be softened in some way. How wonderful that the work of the Lucille Packard does exactly that with the planters, et cetera, you know, and the breakup and the panels that extend out. So even if you extended out something that was a softer element and broke up the mass of it, I think there's much more study that needs to be done at the ends. Talking a bit about the window bay and the verticals and the kind of, nobody has mentioned the fact that we're going to prominently see that mechanicals on the top of the building. I wonder if it's really necessary to have that big a mass. Does it have to be an interior room of some sort with a roof on it, or how is that going to work? Is the mechanical equipment going to be really that tall? I know it sort of parallels the mechanical equipment on the existing building, but I find it really an impressive piece of work up there that you're really going to see so prominently. And as to the window facade, it certainly would be nice if there was more of a broken up of feeling of, again, of the Packard way of treating a facade than such a emphasis on the big vertical windows, the big squarish windows on each of the floors. I really kind of wonder if you, you know, I know it sort of looks very much like the rooms at the top of the new hospital, but in that kind of large open look to it. But my preference is that it's a softer feel to that, and as it is related to the landscaping in the courtyards below. I'm really wondering about how the courtyard will be used. I see that the first opening as you enter the promenade from the south, with all that activity, by the way, that's just, the programming is just fantastic for all of the promenade. I'm quite pleased with that. And I think it's all of the people that are going to be using this, even in a sort of an off time like yesterday when I was there. It's going to be quite an active, wonderful space. And the fact that the dining is kind of set back on the opposite side, and that you're going to bring some of that out to the promenade, should you get an extra merit prize for just making a space that's going to be quite unique in a hospital, I think. And a unifying kind of activity space like that, I think, is just great. The courtyards themselves are quite beautiful, and I wonder if the first one in some way could be extended even a little deeper into the, well, maybe actually the middle one is the one I'm thinking of, extended somewhat deeper into the inner space, so that you get away from the promenade and the linearity of it, and kind of connect to the landscaping within the courtyards. I don't see that there's any other use in that space, so it doesn't need to be quite so linear all the way. You could take advantage of the fact that you're creating a garden space in between these two pods that you're extending, and bring some activity from the promenade into the space in the center, so it isn't adjacent to any windowed area. And then, you know, so the middle one really kind of is a egress passage of some sort from the lower area. It's not going to be a really used path particularly, so maybe you could bring some more activity into it from the promenade. Let's see if I go down my list here. The paving patterns, I understand you didn't really deal with the paving patterns too much in the diagrams. The fencing, I actually like that a lot. And I'm surprised to see it blown up there, because I didn't see that detail in our drawings. I would just say that I go along with my cohorts here that the biggest problem is the ends of the buildings, and that there are a variety of ways in which you could treat them. And I think you should try some other design ideas for the facades themselves. I agree it would be nice if there were planting, or if those walls became more of a planted wall, at least for a part of it, and the actual mass of the building had some greenery on it and kind of extended either at the base or higher up, all the way up, or that it was some form of extended elements that came out of the wall that softened the effect and created kind of more of a horizontal shadowing rather than just of verticals that kind of make your eye run full height. And I really do believe you could do a better job with the window walls in the hospital itself. Think more of the way you did Lucille Packard. Okay, that's for me.
All right. Thank you, Board Member Hirsch. Yeah, for me, it's very similar. Have a lot of similar comments. I am a fan of the design of the courtyards, and there's a lot of good things that are happening with this application. The main concerns I have as well are that facade that faces the promenade, and as well as Board Member Hirsch, the smoothness of the facades that go inward that face the courtyard. I think, in concept, the connection that's getting created there is really great, but I do think more articulation could benefit the design as well in sort of both those planes. Especially, there's a lot of people going to be walking there, and there's a lot of opportunity. And I that's why I was asking for clarity on what's happening on that facade, because I see there is an attempt at visual interest, and I think it's a start, but there's more that I think could be done that could benefit this. I was looking at the floor plans, and I do see that one side is a stair and the other side is a room, and I'm sure there's some desire to have some uniformity so that all the rooms can be designed the same, and not necessarily to say that windows are the thing that create interest necessarily. I think there are other things that can be done, especially in these large expanses. So yeah, just to echo my colleagues' comments on that. The fence, I'm also not in love with the fence. I think it's a fence that I've liked in certain other situations, but for whatever reason, I think in this particular application, I'm not quite sure it's the right one. I like the idea of creating something specular and random and patterned, but I think that particular application of that material and that style, I'm not quite sure it works with the rest of the building. Let's see. Oh yeah, sorry. And going back with the facade, the facade where we have these canted panels, maybe there's an opportunity to work in clear stories, or maybe there's an opportunity to partner with an artist to kind of allow them to create something that might be really interesting to look at there. And I'll leave my comments there for now. I wanted to ask the applicant if they had any questions of the board. Or if there's any other comments from the board members.
So one of we were seeking feedback specifically on the fence design, which I think we've heard, and then also any kind of preliminary feedback on the interpretive panels. Those are kind of the specific items that we were hoping to get some early feedback on.
The interpretive panels are the ones, are those items on the right in this picture?
Yes, and then we just have some precedent images here.
I see.
I have a more general comment, but
go ahead, Board Member Balker.
The interpretive panels look fine to me, but it's been about 1.5 years since I've been over to the campus. We last looked at the Biomedical Innovations building, and I I have to say I'm blown away by the quality of the design, the construction, the execution, the way the place is operating. It's really world class what we're seeing over there. I can't say I've seen a better medical facility with so many good things going on. It's a clear sense of direction. It's really pedestrian friendly. It's very clear how you get in and out of the place. You really feel like you're in a great environment. I'm also really pleased to see the Biomedical Innovations building come to life. There's a number of big oak trees in the front that we really pushed hard for them to save, and they've not only saved those trees, they're thriving. I haven't seen happier live oak trees in a long time. And it just makes me so pleased to see an applicant take to heart what we ask and really make it work. They also have there these sunken basement rooms with a landscaping courtyard outside. And again, it's really successful. It's wonderful to see. All of that really left me thinking that these guys know what they're doing. This is really a great thing coming along. And I think as a city, Palo Alto ought to be grateful and delighted to have such a wonderful organization helping them out. So I really felt wonderful about the whole thing yesterday. And I wanted to be sure to put that out publicly. They're doing great work. It doesn't change the sense that this particular facade, I think, needs work, but I wanted to put out the general sense that I, at least, and I believe many people in the city really appreciate this facility, this work that's being done. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for your comments. Thanks.
Can we all join in that one? I think I think this idea of a promenade and a promenade with all those uses that are going to be planned for it is really a socially wonderful thing for all the medical people who are going to be using it. I asked a few people on the mall, to give me some reactions there to who uses this mall. And it's really a connection of all of the facilities that are around it. It's a tremendous thing to have a mall like that. You just don't see that in other hospitals. To see an activity mall like that and to use it functionally. Peter was talking about the landscaping being so great, and I'm really intrigued to see all of the activity space being used here and program space that you're thinking of. It's not just 9-to-5 workspace. It's going to be a place where they're going to really enjoy the outdoors, and that becomes a real wonderful space to be in. The linear mall reminds me of other places, Scandinavian open spaces and whatnot that really work so well. But we're asked to speak about the panels that are we're looking at here. Are there a variety of choices that are being proposed? That's a question too.
It's just in the very early stages of development at this point. So we just have a few precedents that we're looking at.
I like the one on the top. It's so kind of light feeling and sort of fitting into the landscape. The ones up down below, little heavier metal frames or, don't seem to be as pleasant as the one on the top.
Are there any other comments from other
I
board
have
members?
one more comment is nobody else mentioned or was concerned about the mechanical space up above. Is there some way in which that could be decreased in its volume and impact?
I would agree with you, Board Member Hirsch, in that it is quite big and it might be worth looking at.
I share that comment. It did catch my eye that it was so tall. I agree, David's right. It's maybe too big.
Pam, is that something that you're able to speak to?
Yeah, so the uses, the nursing uses are incredibly high air demands. We have BMT floors, oncology floors, so the HVAC systems are incredibly robust. It's a stacked system that does require, it actually pretty much just fits within that volume. So that is the size is because of the demands of the use. It's much greater than a typical acute care hospital. It's the demands are much greater.
It's a shame. It really overwhelms.
So, and I think as part of the formal application, we'd be able to see a little bit more detail about the equipment that's going in there, correct? And so we'd have a better understanding of why that height is needed.
Right.
And probably also a better understanding of what the screen itself is.
Yes.
Any other comments from board members? Nope. And any other questions from the applicant on our review?
No, thanks for all of your comments today.
Thanks. Sorry, I had one last comment on the panels. Actually, I just remembered. I think as you guys are developing these, you know, panels have a tendency to kind of look like junk sometimes on a facade when, because it's like filled with a lot of information. And I think what's really successful about a good information panel is kind of how it brings out what's important. And so, you know, I know board member Hirsch liked the one above, which has sort of a clean look where you have an evenness to the lines on the panels. That's something kind of successful. But I would also encourage, I think you guys are already starting this with your design, that in terms of the coloring of what goes to the background and what comes to the front is key here. And maybe it could integrate, if there is art or something, it might be a nice way of creating something a little bit more 3D than the 2D option. Okay, that's my note. Thank you. And yeah, sorry, I did cut you off maybe a little bit ago. Did you have anything else to say, Molly?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll close this item since it's a study session, and we'll take a 10-minute break. Reconvene at 9:43, 9:40, maybe 9:45. Yeah, I'll see everybody then. All right, I think we are back. We state for the record that Vice Chair Lee has joined us.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Grace.
Okay, for all good, let's move on to our next item, which is the study session on the objective standards project height transition item. Should I let staff take it away?
Yes, thank you, Chair Thompson. Jody Gerhardt, Manager of Current Planning. I just wanted to introduce the item and then I'll turn it over to Jean. As you know, the ARB made a recommendation for approval of the objective design standards in our last meeting. So today we're just focused on the height transition conversation. This is part of the larger objective standards housing streamlining project that will be reviewed by the PTC and ultimately the council sometime this summer. So while today's discussion is a little outside the purview of the ARB, we believe that you as architects are uniquely qualified to discuss this conversation. So we want to get some of your opinions about the specific code changes, but then also maybe get some opinions about changes that might be needed in the future. So with that, I'll let Jean take it away.
Okay, thanks for the great intro. Good morning, Chair Thompson, member of board. Just when you thought you were done with me, I'm back. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump right in because Jody gave a great intro. So in addition to the short staff report that you received, we attached again the At Places memo that Jody and Amy had prepared several weeks ago. And so that really goes into the details of the discussion, and this kind of scary looking table is consolidating what each of the development standards table in Title 18, the zoning ordinance, says about height transition. So depending on which district you're in, there's different language about when the lower height standard applies. So we have the typical height standard, and then when you're next to generally a residentially zoned district that's a lower density, you're subject to a lower height limit. And sometimes, like in the RM40, it's when you're within 50 feet of that adjacent site. Other districts, it's when you're within 150 feet of another residential district, but the reduced height limit only applies when you're within 50 feet of that property line of the abutting district. And so there's different language used across the entire ordinance, which, as you might imagine, creates some confusion for staff, for applicants, when both interpreting what each of these means and then, sort of remembering across districts what's going on. So to show it more graphically, we showed this last time, but just to make the point clear, the graphic on the right is showing this conceptually. So we've got a lower density residential district in yellow, a higher density, typically commercial district in the blue over here. And when the way that staff has been interpreting this is when you're within 50 feet of a property line, the height limit is subject to that lower standard. So maybe you're at 50 feet over here, when you're 50 feet beyond the property line, but it's this lower, typically 35-foot height limit when you're closer to the property line. And so staff is proposing to modify the language just to make it more clear. We're not trying to propose substantive changes to the language at this time, but just to make the standard more clear. So for example, when we're looking at the 18.16, the CNCS-CC district, this is what the existing language says. It says when you're within 150 feet of a residential zone district, abutting or located within 50 feet of the side. It's not a very clear standard. And again, the way staff has been interpreting it is that lower height standard only applies when you're within 50 feet of the property line. So the proposal is to change that to just within 50 feet of a residential district. That's when this lower height standard applies, and disregard the language about 150 feet. Now the CD district it's more clearly written, but it is different. So the existing standard says when you're within 150 feet of a abutting residential zone, this lower height standard applies. So in that case, that 150 feet would extend off of my screen somewhere over here, and you'd be subject to that lower height limit across that whole plane. And so we do want to talk to you about whether this standard makes sense. Is that too much? Is that right? But for now, we're not proposing substantive changes, so we're not really proposing to make any substantive changes to that language. So in the At Places memo, there are text edits that are proposed as part of the Objective Standards project. So we were working with you on design standards. We also, as you recall, have another series of changes to other parts of Title 18, and this is the language that's proposed as part of those other changes. And so this looks a little less scary as a table. It's just generally more consistent across each of the districts. But again, we're not trying to make substantive changes at this time. And then I just wanted to pause for a minute to talk about where this 150-foot threshold came from. And you can see it on the zoning map, the graphic at right. All of these hashed blue is showing where that 150-foot distance applies. And so here's El Camino. You'll see it all up and down El Camino, where you've got commercially zoned sites abutting lower density residential districts. The other place that the 150-foot threshold appears is in the performance standards section of the code, where it talks about if
Did Jean freeze on us?
We lost Jean.
Oh.
You're back, Jean. Go ahead.
Okay. So the performance standards, when you're within 150 feet of these lower density districts, the performance standards applies relating to visual screening, noise, parking, glare from potential lighting, air quality, hazardous materials, etc. Now, over the course of time, the city has applied the performance standards more broadly to all different types of projects, regardless to those adjacencies. But this is just to give you a sense of the number of places in the code where that 150-foot threshold appears. So in practice, how has this been getting applied? Again, staff's interpretation is this 50-foot limit. So here's the Wilton Court project. It's fronting El Camino here. It's adjacent to an RM30 site over here. And so you see that lower height limit getting applied within 50 feet. And if the city had been interpreting it more conservatively, more broadly within 150 feet, the entire project would have had reduced height out to El Camino. Another example of this application is a hotel site on El Camino. You can see this Hilton Garden Hotel is beyond the 50-foot limit of this RM30 site. And so in this case, the reduced height was not required. Again, if the standard was interpreted as within 150 feet, this would have had a lower standard across this portion of the site. So we have sort of two buckets of questions for you. The first directly relates to our objective standards project. And so that's asking you if you support the city's text edits in the App Places memo to change the language now. And this is really clarification language, so it's more clear for staff, for applicants, for decision makers. And then our second series of questions is really more holistic or philosophical, or really wants to tap into your expertise as practitioners and thinking about the housing element process that's coming up and how we think about height transitions in general. So from your perspective, what is the appropriate distance for when to require reduced height? Is it that 50-foot distance? Is there some other way we should be achieving height transitions? Second, should height transitions be different depending on context or depending on the district? So should height transitions be different, for example, in downtown or other locations compared to maybe residential neighborhoods further from the business district or further from transit? And then third, thinking about the other ways that the city regulates height and regulates height transitions. Is the existing daylight plane a good technique for transitioning buildings? Should we be thinking about other ways to make those transitions, such as upper story setbacks or other techniques that you have in mind? So those are our series of questions for you, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Jean. I wanted to ask if there were any comments from the general public on this item.
Chair Thompson, there are no raised hands for this item.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of staff from the board?
Chair Osma, I do have a question.
Sure.
For Jean or staff. I just wanted to see if you could point to an area where it is written or codified that describes the intent of building height transitions. Where do we see that? And how is it worded in terms of intent? Is it in several places per specific districts, or is there an area where we can just talk about that? I just thought it might be a good starting point in terms of understanding how the city defines intent of building height transitions.
So we do have Amy Frontier, our chief planning official, who may have some more background on this, but as best I know, these height transitions are in the development standards tables. So they're just in a table. There's no sort of extra language that comes with them.
That's what I was wondering. And then maybe my follow-up question is, where does staff think it's appropriate to have some kind of codified or some description of the intent of building height transitions? I know it's a big question. I'm just wondering.
I don't know that we need intent as long as our development standards are clear. I think we are trying to move towards more objective standards. So I think just having proper language in the table is good.
Okay, thanks, Jody.
Are there any other questions of staff?
I do, yes, if I could, Osma.
Go ahead, Member Balte.
I'm curious about the required setbacks. If you could just refresh my memory, when you're putting one of these properties, a commercial property or an RM40 next to a residential neighborhood, Is there a 10-foot setback requirement? Do I remember that correctly?
I'm looking up as we speak. There usually is like a rear, in the commercial zones, there would be a 10-foot rear setback for the residential portion of a project. Actually, there would also be a 10-foot setback when abutting a residential zone.
Yeah, my experience has been that we always seem to have a 10-foot setback against residential zones and properties. And then, do I remember right that the daylight plane, however, does not apply? Residential properties have a daylight plane relative to each other. Does that apply?
There are definitely some zones where it says to, take the daylight plane from the adjacent residential zone and to replicate that on the commercial zone. There's definitely instances where that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So the zoning map shows the height transitions required for RM40 as well as PCs, but those are typically excluded in the written language of the code. And I was wondering if anybody recalls when that change was made to exclude RM40 and planned communities. I have a vague recollection, like of a discussion with Lee Lippert, who did like 3 terms on the ARB and 2 terms on the Planning Commission, about how, like, if a new PC comes in, that it shouldn't downzone existing zoning. And so I think that was the logic for not requiring the height transitions for PCs. But I was wondering if there's any recollection of that.
I don't have any specific recollection.
Amy's on mute.
I think Amy, you're on mute. Cannot hear.
We're not able to hear you, Amy. Okay, we'll let her work on microphones there. I don't have any special recollection. I mean, other than RM40 is our, highest residential density. So I think that's why it's called out differently. And usually our PCs are higher density as well.
And then does the old zoning map get updated, like that I got from staff electronically, and the one that I had since I started on the ARB are dated back in like 2007? Are those old maps? Are those continuing to be updated, or is it really, or is staff really relying on like the GIS?
Yes, so the maps are updated on a regular basis, although we don't do many. We've only done like a handful of rezonings, a handful of PCs and that sort of thing. So there wouldn't be many changes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, staff? Amy, were you able to get your audio to work? No. Okay. Okay.
No, I do. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I was on mute. Is 50-foot height limitation throughout the zones, throughout all zones?
Sorry, say again?
Is the 50-foot height limitation on all zones in all buildings in all zones?
No, all the different zones have different height limits, although 50 feet is generally our maximum height limit.
So just downtowns would have, exceeds that?
So no, we're not speaking about the height limit itself. We're just speaking about the transition and the lower height limits that are required in those areas. And so we're talking about more the distance, not the height.
I understand that, but certainly the height limitation is also a factor relative to the distance, because if you figure a daylight plane or daylight issues, the height issue does come into play. So the only areas where it isn't being discussed here basically at all. Is that correct?
Not the actual allowed height number, just when to implement a lower height limit is what we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer
zone.
your? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I guess.
Okay. And sorry. I think I hear Amy French now.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Oh, I just, in answer to Board Member Lee's earlier question about purpose, Chapter 1823 does have, which is the performance standards chapters related to the 150-foot boundary area that's adjacent to residential. It does have a couple of sentences there. I can read a sentence. It's pretty broad, though. It's not specific to height transition. It just says the purpose is to balance the needs of the uses within these zones with the need to minimize impacts to surrounding neighborhoods and businesses. It says the criteria are intended to make new developments and major architectural review projects compatible with nearby residential and business areas, and to enhance the desirability of the proposed developments for site residents and users, and for abutting neighbors and businesses. Pretty broad statement. And then just to echo Alex's statement, sorry, Board Member Liu's statement. Yes, I recollect around that. I don't remember what year that was, but something that you said about Lee Lippard. I mean, I've been here for a number of years, so that resonates with me. I can't place the year though. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Amy. And I just want to be clear, when you said general language just out in front of 18.23 is what you said?
Yeah, it's the section 1823.010, purpose and applicability. So I was reading from the purpose section. Yeah, purpose section A.
Thank you. And then I have a question for staff, and maybe you can just answer it, Amy, if you want. But when we talk about how it was written previously in terms of the 100, the language that is a little bit hard to decipher in terms of 150 feet from a residential district, and I understand that's staying sometimes. Is that distance sometimes a diagonal distance? Is there ever a case where it's a diagonal distance where it's unclear what that means?
Yes, it's just as the crow flies from, the building to the wherever the property lies.
That's what I thought. And so is there somewhere where I'm just wondering, just to get to the nitty gritty, if you're to dimension it, is that something that is can be from a corner of a building diagonally out into a neighborhood? Is that what I'm understanding? Or is there a way that it's described somewhere?
It's from the lower density property line to the corner of
property line.
The corner of the new, well, from the lower density property line to the corner of the new building.
So it's not property line to property line, for example.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe Jean, if you show that slide back, the graphic for the measurement.
Thank you.
Wilton Court.
That looks like it's going to the building, but I see now that it's going to a fence, which is probably on top of the property line.
Yeah, and you can see it on Wilton Court as well. It's from the RM30 property line to the Wilton Court building.
Okay, sorry. If you stay on the slide, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry I'm taking so much time up. But if that wasn't RM30, it might have been 150, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
No, if it was downtown, it would have been 150.
Right. So this situation downtown would have been 150 feet.
Correct.
Currently. Okay, thank you.
Actually, Grace, on Wilson Court, this one is under the affordable housing
Yes.
overlay.
Okay, so
And
that might
it
supersede.
has 50 feet, but if it has the 50 feet, but if it were not affordable housing, it would be 150 feet.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yeah.
in the affordable housing has the same sort of, actually, no, I'm sorry. It's workforce housing has the same sort of confusing language as the commercial zones. Affordable housing does say within 50 feet, but it also gives the director a little bit of latitude. So this Wilton Court is actually like 46 feet. But it's sort of a good representation of what would happen in a standard commercial zone.
Okay, and then I guess for Jean or for all of you, this is something when you say you have these questions you want us to discuss, the future housing discussions, this is something that will be posed to the housing element group, right? That was newly formed. I assume that you're going to be bringing this exactly to them.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, should we go kind of question by question, or maybe just the bigger topics?
If we could start with, just the objective standards project for today, the specific language, maybe we can do a round of that and then a round for the future discussion.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do that. Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to support what staff is doing. I think it makes a lot of sense to bring everything to the 50-foot distance as Jody has done. So my answer to the first part is yes, I support that strongly.
Thanks. Board Member Hirsch?
I agree with Mr. Bolte that the 50 feet seems very reasonable to me, especially looking at Wilton Court and seeing the way the massing is done. It seems an appropriate dimension, and the restriction that's involved there seems to be working very well with that particular planning and in that zoning, in that program, and should work in all others as well.
Thank you. Board Member Liu?
Yeah, so I am actually strongly opposed to this as a minor revision. I think the logic that I'm using is that the zoning map is drawn to scale. The distance is shown at 150 feet. And I think this is like a very substantial change that really requires the full city review process to make that change. And I think the case needs to be made that that it's necessary for housing. I think that's fine. I think the argument can be made, but I think that this is not the way to do it. Seems like we've made revisions in the past, so there's no, I don't see any reason why we couldn't make another revision in the future. But I would actually do something much more tailored, much more site-specific, and not make it a blanket 50-foot throughout all the different districts. There's a lot of old stuff in the code, and I think maybe some of it doesn't. And I think I agree with staff that it's a bit of an mess. I do agree that that it should be cleaned up a little bit. I think my general thought is that the way forward should be, at least for the CS and CN zones, and maybe CC zones, is to bring back the all residential zoning. So we used to allow like all residential buildings on El Camino, and then after the Arbor Real project, then the council decided they didn't really want to see that type of project. And so they eliminated the all residential zoning. It me that we should keep the existing standards as they are, and then tailor something for like an apartment building on El Camino. And what that transition should be, I'm not exactly sure. I've looked at several different projects. I think the Wilton Court is sort of my maximum or minimum, the 50 feet. I've looked at like the Mike Spikes site, which is the 3001 El Camino project. And there, the 150-foot distance ended up making the building to be like a single loaded corridor apartment building, which is really inefficient, which means it's very expensive for the developer. And I think in that case, I was measuring it out, maybe 100 to 125 feet would have made the building much more efficient. So I would be in support of some sort of reduction in there. And maybe it's sliding scale depending on the size of the lot. But I think like applying the 50-foot to the RO alum, right, which is like along West Bayshore, and then you've got like a lot of Eichler neighborhoods behind there, I think would be like completely inappropriate. I think the one areas that we should really focus on is probably like CS and R1, for example, like in the North Ventura Cap area. So you've got some things right at the like our major transit center area on California Avenue, and you've got R1 zoning right behind it. And I think that those types of areas that I think we have to really look very carefully at to try to allow larger buildings and then provide a buffer for the R1. So I think that's all that I have on this particular one, but I am opposed to this particular minor text edit.
Thank you, Board Member Liu. Vice Chair Lee.
I want to thank staff and for bringing this to our attention and applaud their efforts. I do agree with and support the staff's text edits and would like to move forward as proposed, and really look forward also to the future housing discussion piece. I think that Board Member Liu brings up some very interesting points, and look forward to discussing that and seeing how it may unfold with other bodies like the Planning Commission and Council and the Housing Element Group.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lee. For me, it's interesting. I appreciate Board Member Liu's comments. It's given me a bit more to think about than I had originally addressed or assessed, rather. There's something nice. What's nice about this change is that it's very, it feels like a very local choice, that you're talking about something that's really abutting something else. And it's not really thinking about something that's 150 feet out, which as a pedestrian, you may not notice as much, but potentially from a further back perspective, it might be noticeable. So in general, I'm okay with the change. I think Board Member Liu's suggestion of doing a tailored approach is actually a really valid suggestion. And even though I think it seems like the majority of this board is in favor of the change, that is something staff should really consider. Potentially something might come up when you look at those things, item by item, just the way that table is laid out, that something may appear that where this doesn't make sense. So is there any other discussion from other board members after hearing everyone's first round?
Osma, are we going to broaden our discussion now about this topic?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
I don't know if you received, I made a sketch on the back of my pamphlet here, and I'm hopeful to share that. I sent an email copy to you and Jody Gerhardt. Did either of you get it? Are you able to screen share somehow?
I'll check right now.
Yeah, I can look as well. I
sit at a coffee shop on the avenue when I read these packets, and I just made a sketch for myself to understand, just to help me clarify. I like to draw things down. And I think it would be helpful if I could show that to everybody.
Did you email it to us?
Yeah, I don't see such an email.
Or is it possible for me to screen share?
Yeah, you should be able to share.
How do I do that?
Just down on the bottom, share screen, and then just pick which one to share.
It's the green button.
Oh boy, share screen, here we are. Oh, perfect, look at that. Is that working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I did a cross section through a commercial property abutting a residential one. And I just gave a lot of thought to what we're trying to accomplish with this transition. And it seems to me there's two fundamental things. One is what you call light and air. That's what a daylight plane regulates. It's the sense of a building towering over another property, blocking sunlight, blocking access to fresh air, et cetera. And the other is just having privacy. And what I was surprised by is when I sketch out what the daylight plane requirement is for a residence against another residence, for example, it goes up, starting at 10 feet at the property line, goes up at 45 degrees to the height limit. And then I sketch on my thing in a heavy red line what the current allowance is, where you have to be 10 feet away from the property line, but then you can go to 35 feet in height. And then you have to go over a full 50 feet before you can go to the full 50-foot height limit. What jumps at me is that we're a little bit backwards here. We really ought to have the limit be 40 feet to accomplish the daylight plane protection of residential property. The 50 feet is additional even to what a residential protection would be. At the same time, allowing the 35-foot height limit within 10 feet of a property is too much. It seems to me that some sort of analysis of a daylight plane type regulation would make more sense. If our goal really is to protect the light and the air impact on residential properties as a whole. And then I think a 10-foot buffer is wonderful for allowing landscaping screening for privacy and things like that. So I guess my conclusion, and I'm not saying it's a strong conclusion, but rather I thought this sketch was helpful just to clarify my thoughts, was that even 50 feet is more than the protection afforded residential property with the current daylight plane standard. And yet also the extra height very close in is a much bigger impact. A 35-foot tall building 10 feet from your property is a greater impact than a 50-foot tall building 50 feet from your property. So I just throw this sketch out for everybody to see, and I guess I can stop sharing the screen or whatever is necessary.
No, keep it up. I think
so look, I put it out there. I was just sketching, drinking coffee, and I spent the rest of the week thinking, is there a conclusion to draw from this? And I'm not sure there is, but this analyzes it to me at least.
Well, I'd like to comment on that. I just think that the daylight plane is such a useful tool, really more useful than a specific dimension. So I think this sort of proves it here. It's commonly used in the New York area. I can just tell you that except for concentrated center urban areas, the daylight plane in most residential areas is the key. Where it is against commercial zones, which may not work as well, but it looks appropriate here to me. And that the 50 feet, actually, you're right. It's more restrictive. I mean, it is more restrictive to be that much further back than the daylight plane. So it's a reasonable number if you're going to choose a number. That's what this diagram shows me.
Any
I'll
thoughts
jump
from
in.
Vice Chair Lee? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you for sharing that. And I also appreciate Amy French's description. Because when we talk about mitigating impacts and balancing needs, ensuring compatibility and desirability, I just feel like it's really important to understand the intent behind development standards. Because when we look at a table, I know that I have looked at tables working in cities and just tried to understand, well, why? I mean, because I can think of some specific examples in neighboring cities where the intent is achieved, but the development standard that I see in the table is different. And so, and then I just wanted to open up and see how you want to proceed, Ozma. But I feel like when we talk about future housing discussions, a large part of what we should talk about is also maybe the future and sustainability for a city that's for our town. And so, that's my general comment. But I really appreciate this diagram, Peter, and just thinking about dimensions. And I really appreciate the discussion from Alex regarding the different kinds of proposals. And even if you just said housing, for example, or if you just said, for profit commercial, or, or a mix, we all can think of various situations where, there's going to be exceptions or reasons or districts that make us feel slightly different. I just feel like, in terms of going back to what staff has given us today, it's important to clarify the language so that they are able to apply and instruct moving forward. But I'll just stop there.
And I think we are going to open it up now, Vice Chair Lee, to future housing things. I think this diagram is really speaks to a lot of I think what I've been thinking about, but it's nice that it's sketched out here. There's something to be said about the daylight plane and its validity in terms of providing light and air. Oftentimes I've wondered if it is the most effective way. I've seen other transitions elsewhere where it is the hard red line that goes beyond it and over, and it does feel like it has a harmony with what's around in the context. And if every building were to adhere to the daylight plane, you can imagine maybe what the city might end up looking like, with these sort of steep, maybe terraces or diagonals that kind of create these little pockets. It's an interesting choice. For future housing opportunities, I think there's, the daylight plane can be seen as very restrictive in terms of development. And I do want to caution, that note as well. At the same time, it is important that we ensure light and air. And I think there are efforts that we are doing, with setbacks and things that also achieve that. So those are my 2 cents. Are there any other comments on this and future housing opportunities?
Seems to me that the daylight plane and the yard requirements kind of meet together. Together they form kind of a good controls. And my concern about, to be honest, about objective subjective, and I'm the negative vote on that one, has been really that I'm coming from a background of rather strict zoning that is based on formulas based on the daylight plane and yard and setback requirements. And those are absolutely objective. But then, of course, Palo Alto, as Alex points out, is a different environment here where we're probably more concerned with neighboring issues than New York is, for example, and sensitive to that. But there has to be a kind of a balance somewhere in between. And I think that this diagram really shows it to me. If it could be more a selection that cleans up this text, and seems to me the 50-foot works within this diagram or to use the daylight plane, one or the other, would be effective. And so I would go along with the staff's here, but also I think a daylight plane would be equally successful.
Ozma,
Sorry, I was going to give Board Member Liu a chance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything I'm not sure I have anything to say on the daylight plane, other than in many places we have the zero setback allowed. Like for example, in the CS zone, you can build right at the property line. And so that seems to be problematic in some cases. And then I'm collecting my thoughts on the more general housing issue. So I'll come back later.
Okay, Board Member Balte?
Yeah, well, Alex is correct. You have zero setback in the CS zone, except when you're next to a residential property where you have 10 feet. And yeah, I'm starting to coalesce.
There's only low density.
Go ahead, Alex.
That's not for, but see, there's multifamily and then there's R1. And I think it only applies to the very lowest, like R1, RMD.
It's not been my experience, Alex. I'm working on a project downtown. We had 10-foot requirements point blank in the CC zone. But
yeah, there's a 10-foot setback in the performance standards.
There's a 10-foot rear setback abutting residential zones. This is for a mixed use or residential project in the commercial zones. And residential zones would be all the different residential zones up to RM40.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
But my thought is more that I think a combination of yard control, setbacks, and a daylight plane is probably a better, less restrictive way of achieving the same overriding objective, which is to preserve a sense of light and air and achieve more privacy. Ozma, to your point, I think if I were designing, I'd much prefer to have a daylight plane, which gives me a lot more flexibility to go a little bit higher if I step forward or backward. As a designer, I appreciate having the ability to decide for myself. Just being told 35 feet until I get 50 feet away is a pretty strong requirement. And I think a greater design flexibility, more subjectivity comes from a daylight plane. Never thought about it that much before, but I think that's how I feel that way anyway. So I guess I'd like to, I don't know if recommend or anything, but just it seems to me that a daylight plane is worth more consideration. Ultimately, Alex is correct. These are big issues that council and planning commission and other boards and bodies need to think about. But if you want architectural advice, to me, this diagram says what I think.
Okay, thanks. Why don't we go back to the questions on the greater discussion? If you're able to stop share.
Jean, are you able to bring that up?
I just want to give the board a chance to discuss some of these questions here on the appropriate distance and the height transitions in downtown. So I think I heard that Vice Chair Lee and Board Member Liu were wanting to speak to these. So we'll start with Vice Chair Lee.
Thank you, Ozma and staff for posing the questions. I guess I had a couple of thoughts, and I also did want to engage Alex also with the question of, I think Alex had mentioned some specific districts within Palo Alto and more of a kind of a gradual or a layered way of looking at this for a future housing discussion. So I just wanted to pick that up to understand that better. And for me, when I look at these three questions, I think they're very important to ask. I think largely my impression of when working and being on architectural review is that I generally am questioning the height transition requirements where proposal might be still fulfilling the intent in terms of might be slightly not the standard that's in the table, but still seems to balance needs and provide compatibility and desirability. And so I guess I was wondering if there are specific projects that we as a whole or just what we've seen in Palo Alto where we feel like the height transition requirements have been either too much or not the appropriate measure for compatibility or mitigated impact. So I just want to bring that out, and then also talk about is there a focus in terms of I understand that there's a lot more proposals for perhaps the corridors, right? El Camino or downtown or specific areas. And so maybe there's also a way for us to talk about this in terms of our knowledge of specific areas in the city where we see these applied, and how does that relate to future housing. I was just thinking of how can we as a group be helpful to future discussions as well for housing element, for planning commission, for council. Is there a way to structure that? I just wanted to open that up. So I just thought these questions bring up other questions from me. But in general, I favor really understanding what the intent is, and then how to do that might be through looking at light and air, or it might be through providing enough privacy, or providing enough of a program area for open space, for a particular use. So for me, that it always goes back to the intent to understand how to best provide the development standard.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lee. Board Member Liu, did you have some items?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention some things that I researched for today's meeting. So one is, so El Camino in Mountain View. So they did a specific plan for the entire length of El Camino. And they broke it down into major nodes, and then corridor areas, and then like low density corridor areas. And they tailored the height to those sections, to those segments. And then they also had a process where there's like base zoning, and then there's like tier 1 and tier 2 upzoning if you go through design review and city council review. And it seems to me that the advantage of doing that is that you can put more, you can allow larger buildings where there's transit, and in other places where there's predominantly one-story commercial buildings and one-story houses, that you can keep it relatively low for the near future. And it seems to me to be more strategic. I think the way Palo Alto has done it is sort of it's very chaotic to figure out like how high a building can be on El Camino. You need to sit down for like at least half a day or a day and get out the zoning book and the zoning map and research all the different parcels around the property, and then figure out what you want to put on the building, and then you can figure out the height limits once you do all of that work. So at least in Mountain View, it's fairly straightforward for people to understand what is the height limit in this particular section of town. The other city that I looked at was Berkeley, because I'm familiar with a lot of the new apartment buildings in Berkeley, and I looked at the transition areas that they make, and they do much more abrupt transitions than we do. I'm generally finding like they did about 50 feet, at least 50 feet of step downs from big 5-story apartment buildings down to 2-story houses. And I generally would find that to be acceptable in the more urban areas of Palo Alto, but I think it's too much in some of the other more, 1-story areas of Palo Alto. And then I think that the third city that I thought about was San Francisco, where they have, they have the zoning map, but they also have a height map. I think they do it mostly because of hills, but it's really very site specific. They go through like every parcel will have this specific height limit. And so that's another thing to consider too. But again, like San Francisco has such steep hills that I think that's where that came from. And also they've been wanting to add more housing there. So they did upzone a lot of the heights to get more housing. So, yeah, so I think that's all I've got.
Thank you, Board Member Liu. Does Board Member Hirsch or Board Member Balte have any more to discuss on the future housing discussions?
I think I've said what I can add to the conversation already, Osma. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
For
And
the
Board
most,
Member Hirsch?
yeah. I mean, I think that I'm actually thinking back to my own experience in designing my house here, which was very much required the keeping. It's a very narrow lot, and I had to keep to the daylight plane, and the house actually becomes a kind of a zoning diagram because of those restrictions. And it's hard to live with that, but I think it's important to have those kinds of regulations, and they're in a way they're better than just choosing a specific dimension. And I don't know how to answer Alex's concerns really for all of the different zones, just never having worked as an architect with these restrictions. But I definitely come down in favor of a daylight plane and yard requirements, setbacks, rear yards, etc. And those seem to me to kind of give you the envelope, and then you have to work with it. If a site doesn't work, it doesn't work, or you find a design that does work. And that's sort of where I'm at. I think that the daylight plane manages to do exactly what it's supposed to do, provide appropriate daylight for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Hirsch. Yeah, and I think the other thing I would just add is, sometimes when there's regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation on a site, there's some cases where the site is really hard to develop and it's kind of rendered useless sometimes. I know of an example that's not in Palo Alto specific, but nearby where, it's a great lot and it's in a great location, but because of all of the regulations of height and, zoning, that nobody wants to develop it and nobody knows what to do with it. And so that's kind of really unfortunate. And that would be the only thing that I would caution, is that, when there are certain specific sites that come up that, struggle, I think it'd be worthwhile to sort of have the city take a closer site specific eye on those lots, as Board Member Liu has mentioned. And in terms of height transitions, we've seen some cool projects where even though the bulk was there, even though the massing was there, the articulation was able to make it seem like it was transitioning down. And there's a lot to be said for those things as well. And so given that, especially for housing, that we need it, you know, so badly, there might be something to be said about, you know, allowing more height, you know, closer, and having another stipulation that allows for, at least visually, that it's sort of less oppressive. Any other last thoughts from anybody?
I can give just a few last thoughts, and thank you, Chair Osman, because I agree with your comments and others as well. I just to answer the questions for staff. I mean, I do think that 50 feet or less is appropriate for transitions in general. However, when we're talking about housing, it's exactly what you just said, Chair Osman. I have looked at sites and Mountain View elsewhere where it's just you have to pass them up because they aren't able to actually build per the zoning, quality housing per requirements for funding and for quality of life. And so I feel like, yes, the height transition should be reduced in the downtown as well as other areas when it is a predominant housing program. Absolutely. I'm just going through your list, the daylight plane, upper story setbacks, and then as Chair Osman just mentioned, actual articulation modulation, or going through this discretionary review to achieve the aims of your intent. And I'm hoping, because I really appreciate Alex's just looking at the three cities, right? San Francisco, Berkeley, and Mountain View. But I'm hoping that, maybe it's planning commission or the housing element is directed by staff or by others that, we need to learn. Can we learn from other cities' efforts on the peninsula or locally, or even out in California, or even outside? I don't think that Palo Alto should, I don't understand why it's tabula rasa each time. If there's a way to bring forward examples and lessons learned from other cities, and I guess in this list, Alex, I just see, the Mid-Peninsula, what's happening in San Mateo and Burlingame, and I wonder how, if the housing element is a group of experts, right, who have engaged with housing in different ways. I just think that's a great step forward in a place where some of this could be examined more closely.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lee. Any other final comments before we finish the study session?
Well, I'd like to get back in this for a minute because I definitely agree that downtown is a whole other area, and that looking forward to the possibility of there being housing in downtown for a lot of reasons. And these regulations, if they were used in downtown, wouldn't be useful at all. So there has to be really a choice between what is used in the downtown area and the restrictions in totally residential areas, and where the conflict really arises, where residential neighborhoods meet up against other uses. That seems to be the area that this is specific to, but that shouldn't be in areas of the downtown.
Sorry, Board Member Liu, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to, with regard to downtown, I just wanted to, to point out there's one little house on an alley off of Bryant Street, and it's historic. And because it's there, right? It has the zoning map says it's got the 100, it's drawing the 150 feet thing all around it. So it's basically like down zoning like half of the city block for one historic house. So I think like something like that, I think really should bear some scrutiny, and there must be a way for allowing like a historic house to have some sun, but not impact, you know, half of the city block. So I think we should consider reducing it in the downtown area. So, and that's it.
Great. Any last thoughts from anyone? Okay. Any questions from staff for closing remarks on this item?
No, thank you all for your comments.
Great, thank you. All right, well, that will move on to our next item. And so I think Jody already mentioned about item 4, that it'll be continued.
Correct, it'll be continued to May 6th, our next meeting.
Great. And then, so then that puts us to the approval of minutes. The Architectural Review Board minutes from March 18th.
Ozma, do you need a motion and a vote to continue something once it's on the agenda?
This particular item we continued fairly early in the process, so no motion is needed. Thank you.
But we do need a motion to approve the minutes for March 18th.
I'd like to.
I have one.
Go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead. Okay. I have one correction on packet page 44 of the minutes. When I was speaking, so it says 56 in there, which is a street number address, and I actually said 636. But I actually meant to say, I misspoke and actually meant to say 429. And I will through the minutes for March 18th, 2021.
I have a couple of comments to make first, if I could, Ozma.
Sure.
I read through the minutes reasonably carefully, and I was surprised by the whole number of what you might call typographical mistakes. Some of them more substantial than that, though. On page 37, for example, a statement was attributed to me, which I didn't make. The same thing on page 38. On page 41, up in the body of the text, the existing is wonderfully falling apart, dilapidated. It's not correct. There's a lot of times where what's written is really not an accurate transcription. Maybe a dozen locations in here. So I don't know that I want to try to go through them all and correct them. They don't affect the intention of the content. But Jody, I guess to staff, I wonder if there's a way to request one more round of proofreading before these are released. On the top of page 37, Chair Thompson says, so we don't see this bailing in front of the wall like we're seeing in the elevation. And what she means to say is railing, not bailing. It just goes on and on in this particular set of minutes. So I guess I think another round of editing would be a good idea in general. So I can second Alex's motion to approve them.
Yes, if you're Board Member Balte, if you're able to send us those corrections that you do have, that would be helpful.
I can just list them to you. Can I do that instead? I mean,
I think
it's a lot of work for me to type out a big email to you, Jody.
Okay.
Page 35, last line, Board Member Balte says, do you anywhere identify the sides of these panels? What I said was size, not sides. Page 37, top line, Ozma Thompson says, so we don't see this railing, not bailing, which is what's written. Halfway down the page, Dave Hurst was speaking, and all of a sudden I'm attributed to saying, okay.
What page was that?
Page 37. Page 38, halfway down again. We were talking about the light fixtures on the building. And again, Board Member Balte is attributed to a statement made by Board Member Hirsch. Let's see. page 42 in the motion, second sentence, second line in the motion there, successful motion over the height of the board. That's not what I said. I would move the successful motion over the entire board. The height of the board doesn't make sense, what's said there. Alex's statement about 56, the address on University Avenue. I think that covers my red marks then.
Okay, I've written those corrections down.
Again, they're not really important in this particular frame of mind, but I was surprised to see so many things like that.
Yes, and I think we'll be talking at the next meeting. The council has actually asked that we no longer do verbatim minutes, that we do more summary type minutes. And so hopefully that'll help the typist, that'll help us in our review, and hopefully we can be more accurate in that way going forward.
Great, then I'm sorry to waste everybody's time looking at this all. Thank
No,
you.
that's good. We need a clear record.
Okay, so we have a motion by Lou, second by Balte, to approve the draft meeting minutes. Can we get a vote?
Yes. Board Member Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Chair Thompson.
Yes,
The motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
thank you. And then our next item is board member questions, comments, announcements, and I have NVCAP on there.
Yeah, so the NVCAP is going to be presented to the City Council on June 14th. And that's all that I have on that one.
Great. Thank you. There are no others. This meeting is adjourned.
Yes, if we just have, thank you very much, everyone. If we just have Chair, Board Member Balte and Board Member Hirsch stay on for the ad hoc committee.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all, except Peter.
David, bye, everybody.
And do we have
Okay.
Sam? I can hear you, can't see
Yeah.
you.
Oh, 1 second. I might have to turn off my camera because it's my connection is kind of wonky, but let's try and see.
Okay, that's fine if you need to leave it. Yeah, okay. You can
I think
say
it worked
hi
right
and
now, but
say
you know,
hi. You
if
can
you
turn it
hear
off
me-
if you want.
yeah, no, I'll keep it on. But if you hear me get choppy, I do apologize. I'll cut off the camera to save bandwidth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to run away and talk to you later. Thank you all.
Bye, Jody.
So, Bill, can you unmute yourself?
Did that do it?
Yep, we can hear you.
All
I
right.
see you though.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have a camera or you're able to turn it on right now, Bill, but feel free. I am going to share my screen so we could take a look at the plans that were prepared. So 1 moment as I do that. Okay. Can everyone confirm that you can see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you to the ad hoc committee. Still getting used to saying that after so many years being trained the other way. But you know, times have changed. And so I'm Sam Gutierrez, the project planner that previously presented the Macy's signage exemption to the board. And of course, we had some comments and conditions to bring back to the ad hoc group here. It wasn't really about the signage size itself, it's more about location. So here looking at the plans, we could see that there was an adjustment because there was comments about adjusting the lines and the breaks and what the previous proposal was. And here we could see that the signage was adjusted to be kind of left justified. You can see it down the walkway. The other sign that kind of runs along that face of the interior of the shopping center for this Macy's building, further down towards what we call the Market Plaza area, towards Pacific Catch and Sandhill parking lot. Here we could see, again, the signage justified in different sides, but as pointed out during the previous hearing, there's been a number of trees placed there, so it makes it difficult to see, though these signs were brought to level, which was a requirement of the ARB. And then here you could actually see the sign without being blocked by the trees on the walkway. And then there was a question about the placement of the major sign, the large sign towards, I'm not sure what we'd call it, but I guess the Garden Plaza area towards the Apple Store and Neiman Marcus. There was comments about considering the archway, putting it there, and then also, again, not having the Macy's copy overlap with these breaks in the brick facade. So then there was questions about left or right justified, which is shown here. And these perspective pictures, if I could zoom in, hopefully that isn't choppy for everybody to see. But here you can see kind of how the different perspectives from a different side. So this top perspective is, again, from the parking garage, kind of towards the Neiman Marcus side, towards Quarry, as indicated here, Orchard Lane and parking lot, but Quarry would be on this side. And then Sandhill's this way. And similarly here, we could see what it looks like if you're coming from the Sandhill parking lot, as you're going between the buildings and the Neiman Marcus, and you enter this, again, this kind of plaza area, you'll see the existing Macy's signage. So from this perspective, you could see it in either panel, but you wouldn't be able to see it in an arch. And then here's another perspective, again, from kind of the Neiman Marcus stance, where you're kind of blocked of that view of the arch, but you could still see the original Macy's signage here. So the question before the ad hoc group here is what positioning, I guess, is sufficient or more appropriate? And I'll leave it to you, gentlemen.
Who goes first?
I'm trying to figure out what we're being asked exactly.
The location of the on C5, CL5, the location of the Macy's. There are two options.
Oh, I see.
Left, yeah.
And what does the applicant propose?
Well, they're leaving it up to us, I think.
Yes, correct.
So my preference is the one on the corner, closest to the corner.
Well, I agree with you. That's what I would choose were I the designer. I think either one meets the standards we're required to enforce. So,
So for CL5, it would be a left justified, this one here.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're happy with that? I'm happy with that, yeah.
Yeah. And then how
And
about
CL4?
3?
CL4.
Yeah,
the next one.
There we go. So this would be a right justified on this panel and left. And again, this would be kind of the different views from the walkway heading towards the center of the shopping center.
Well, I prefer the one that's on the right side of the strip, vertical strip, that one.
Right here.
Okay, that's fine with me. Both of them are fine, I think. What was our original concern, Sam, with this?
There was a concern. One concern was that the CL4 and CL3 weren't aligned. If you were walking down that walkway, you'd kind of see them a little uneven. So then this has been brought to even stance. And then there was concern about kind of location, because before here there was the Macy's signage was proposed with some in between some of the breaks, and there was concern that it shouldn't be there. The M, I believe, and the A were in the break here. And in the CL3, it kind of mirrored what the original signage is doing, where this kind of break in the brick facade, which is actually pretty thick. I think it's like 4 or 5 inches, was breaking up the copy of the sign. It just didn't look really correct architecturally. So that's where this positioning thing came about and moved.
Okay, so they're now, both signs are aligned vertically, is that right?
Yeah.
Equal distance off the pavement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this one, the CL3 being to the left looks good, and the one where David just suggested in the
CL4
right panel, I think looks better.
Uh-huh.
If that's
Okay.
what we're being asked, that's fine. If
Yeah,
the applicant-
those 3.
Is that it?
That's
Yeah,
it.
that was really it. It
That's
was
it.
pretty simple and straightforward.
Thanks for putting it all together.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Sounds like we're going again, just to make it clear. This looks fine. CL3 does the adjustment. CL4, we're going for the top option here, center panel.
Yep.
And CL5, we're going for this bottom option where you're on the far left panel in the corner.
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
there we
Very
go.
good.
Thanks, everybody. So we're all done. See you.
All done. Bye-bye.
Thank you.